Genshin Impact is a wondrous game, with an ever-growing world and stylish art design is able to capture the imagination of many players. Whether you enjoy the world, story, gameplay, one aspect that will keep players coming back for more are the amazing characters. So, I'm Darcblade, with a character guide to Sangonomiya, Kokomi in Genshin Impact. In this guide we will briefly cover the basic lore of the character, their moves, abilities, weapon options, stat priorities and artifact builds. Remember though that these guides are aimed at free-to-play and low-spender players, so the guides will feature characters as if they were Constellation level 0 with 4-star weaponry. Sangonomiya Kokomi is a Hydro Catalyst user, but unfortunately she's only obtainable through select banners via the Wish system. Sangonomiya Kokomi is the Divine Priestess of Watatsumi Island, the westernmost island in Inazuma. She functions pretty much as the island's ruler, controlling many of the island's affairs with efficiency. However, she is young for a Divine Priestess, but she is part of the Sangonomiya clan, and thanks to her brilliant strategic mind, she has made Watatsumi Island quite prosperous. She was also instrumental when it came to the resistance during the Vision Hunt decree, preventing the Tenryou Commission from claiming full victory. It is a little unusual for a Divine Priestess to be so interested in military affairs, but nonetheless she has an affinity for strategic operations, making her excel when it comes to battle tactics. She may be seen as a little bit of a workaholic, but thanks to her efforts, she is universally loved by her people. Now every character in Genshin Impact has various talents, both combat talents and passive talents available to them. These are pretty much their moves and abilities. So let's talk about Kokomi's. First of all, her combat talents. First up are her normal attacks, known as the Shape of Water. When pressing the attack button, Kokomi will perform 3 consecutive attacks in the form of swimming fish that deal hydro damage to opponents. These are classed as projectiles but will home in on enemies. You can also hold down the attack button to perform a charged attack, which will consume a certain amount of stamina to deal AoE hydro damage to opponents. She can also perform a plunging attack should you press the attack button whilst in the air, which will turn Kokomi into a plunging ball of water that will deal AoE hydro damage around the impact zone. As all of her attacks deal hydro damage, it means that you can make use of her normal attacks for various elemental reactions. Her next combat talent, which is also her elemental skill, is known as Kurage's Oath. This allows Kokomi to summon a Kurage, which is basically a floating water jellyfish, in front of her. Using this skill, however, will apply the wet status to Kokomi, so be aware of this. Now the Kurage jellyfish deals hydro damage in an AoE around it. This of course will damage opponents, but on top of that, it will also heal active nearby characters. So it doesn't heal the entire party, it will heal whoever is active. Now this healing is stronger based on Kokomi's maximum HP, so the more HP she has, the stronger the healing will be. Now the Kurage won't stay active for ages. By default it stays active for 12 seconds and comes with a 20-second cooldown unfortunately. The next combat talent is also her elemental burst known as Nereid's Ascension. Summoning the might of Watatsumi, dealing hydro damage to surrounding opponents. On top of that, Kokomi will also be surrounded in a ceremonial garment made of flowing waters. This ceremonial garment remains active for a small duration of time after performing her elemental burst, to which her normal attacks, charged attacks and Kurage damage are all increased based on her maximum HP. On top of that, her normal and charged attacks, when they hit an opponent, they will restore HP for all nearby party members, not just the active one. The amount restored is also increased based on her maximum HP. Finally, when the ceremonial garment of her elemental burst is active, Kokomi will have increased resistance to interruption and she will be allowed to move on the surface of the water. So a nice skill that can be used to both increase Kokomi's damage as well as heal her allies. But those are all the combat talents available to Kokomi. Let's move on to talk about her passive talents. The first is Tamanoya's Casket. If Kokomi's own Kurage are on the field when she casts her elemental burst, the duration of the jellyfish will be refreshed. So it's a good way to keep it active on the field. Her next passive talent is Songs of Pearls. When donning the ceremonial garment created by the Nereid Ascension, so her elemental burst, the normal and charged attack damage bonus Kokomi gains based on her maximum HP will receive a further increase based on 15% of her bonus healing, which can work exceedingly well with certain artifacts as well as her final passive talent, Flawless Strategy, which we'll talk about in a moment. Her next passive talent is Princess of Watatsumi. This is her passive talent when it comes to traversing the land. This basically decreases swimming stamina consumption for your own party members by 20%. This unfortunately is not stackable with other passive talents found on other characters. So when Kokomi is in your team, you're allowed to swim for longer durations. And then finally, her last passive talent is Flawless Strategy. Kokomi has a 25% healing bonus, but as a result, a 100% decrease to her critical rate. So unless you're heavily invested in a build that has a ton of crit rate, Kokomi cannot crit. And in all honesty, it's more effective to not worry about crit on her build and instead worry about HP, as that is the stat she benefits the most from. This makes her quite unique and can allow for some interesting builds, especially when it comes to artifacts that you initially didn't think were that useful. But anyway, before we move on to the next section, let's quickly talk about constellations. Now, like I said, these builds are aimed for characters as if they're a constellation 0, but sometimes there are 1 or 2 constellations that are worth talking about if you're lucky enough to get them. Kokomi doesn't have the best constellations out there, but for me personally, constellation level 4, if you're able to get it, the moon overlooks the water, is quite nice when it comes to her elemental burst. It allows her normal attack speed to be increased by 10%, and her normal attacks on hitting an opponent will restore energy for her. So this helps both in terms of if you want to use Kokomi as a healer and DPS. So let's move on to the next section and talk about the builds I like to use for Kokomi. Now there are a few builds I like to use for Kokomi, and in all honesty they can be mixed and matched. So you can intertwine them with one another using 2 pieces of one set combined with 2 pieces of another set. For the purpose of this video, I'll be showing off the builds using the artifacts going for the 4 set bonuses. The first build I like to use on her is the support build. This is a build that turns Kokomi into not just a healer but also a support for your team, boosting their overall damage while still being able to effectively heal a team. So, first of all, when it comes to the weapons for this build, of course, if you're able to get 5-star weaponry, this is going to be far more effective than what I may be suggesting here, but I'd first recommend going for the prototype Amber, which gives us a nice HP increase, which is definitely beneficial for Kokomi, as the majority of her skills scale off of her maximum HP, and on top of that it also gives us the gilding bonus, where using an elemental burst regenerates 4 energy every 2 seconds for 6 seconds, and all party members will regenerate 4% of their HP every 2 seconds for this duration as well. So it adds a little bit of a heal to Kokomi via her weapon. Alternatively, the other great weapon for her is a 3-star weapon, the Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers. This again provides a nice chunk of HP, and on top of that, the heritage bonus. When switching characters, the new character that takes the field after Kokomi has their attack increased by a certain percentage for 10 seconds. This effect can only occur once every 20 seconds though, but nonetheless, it means that if you swap to your main DPS after Kokomi, your main DPS will get a nice increase to their attack. Now as for the artifacts, for this build you want to go for the 4-piece Tenacity of the Monolith set. Of course you only need 4 pieces of this artifact set, so you can fill in the missing piece with what you have available to you. But anyway, the Tenacity of the Monolith, for wearing 2 pieces of this artifact set, you will get your HP increased by 20%. As Kokomi is all about HP, this is great for her. This adds to her damage and healing. But for wearing 4 pieces, when an elemental skill hits an opponent, so when the Kurage, or jellyfish, hits an opponent with its AoE damage, the attack of all nearby party members is increased by 20%, and on top of that, their shield strength is also increased by 30% for 3 seconds. This effect can be triggered once every 0.5 seconds as well. This effect can also still be triggered even if the character who is using this artifact set is not on the field. So the way this works is basically as the jellyfish continues to damage opponents over and over again, it will keep this attack increase as well as shield strength increase active despite Kokomi not being on the field, allowing her to buff her team and then switching to heal them when needed. Just remember to recast the Kurage to keep this buff going. But what about the stats you need to consider on these artifacts for Kokomi? First of all, when it comes to the sands, you'll want to go for mainly HP. As for the Goblet, I'll go for Hydro damage, although HP can also be useful here if you so wish. And then finally, when it comes to your Circlet, you'll either want to go for a healing bonus or HP again. As for your substats, HP is king, always try to get HP if you can. Following that, energy recharge, elemental mastery or attack are all useful. You don't need to worry about crit damage or crit rate on any of your artifacts with Kokomi. When it comes to your talent priority, I'd recommend focusing first on Kurage's Oath, followed by Nereid's Ascension, and then your normal attacks. Which brings us on to the next build, which is the DPS Kokomi build. Now this build is a little bit of a niche build, maybe considered a meme build in some respects as well. This build nonetheless makes use of Kokomi as a hydro damage dealer, which works really well when it comes to elemental reaction teams. So, for this build, when it comes to the weaponry, again I'd recommend either going for the prototype Amber or Thrilling Tales of the Dragon Slayers. Failing that, you could also use Dodoko's Tails if you so wanted to, but I would still go for the HP catalysts over the other ones. When it comes to the artifacts, we'll be focusing on the 4-piece Heart of the Depth set. Now, for wearing 2 pieces of the Heart of the Depth, your hydro damage will be increased by 15%, and for wearing 4 pieces of the set, when your elemental skill hits an opponent, so your jellyfish AoE hits an opponent, your normal attack and charged attack damage will be increased by 30% for 15 seconds. Basically, the Heart of the Depth is a great set for any Hydro user out there, if you're using them as a DPS, as we will be using Kokomi here. We're going for the full 4-piece set here because she will be utilising normal and charged attacks when her Elemental Burst is active. Now, as for the stats on them, for your Sands you'll want to focus on HP or attack. For your Goblet you'll want to focus on Hydro damage increase or HP, and then finally for your Circlet you'll want to focus HP attack or, if you wanted to, healing bonus. As for the substats, again you'll want to focus on HP, energy recharge, elemental mastery or attack. You don't really have to worry about crit rate or crit damage. When it comes to your talent priority, for the DPS build I recommend focusing on Nereid's Ascension first, followed by your normal attacks, then Kurage's Oath. When it comes to the DPS build, you'll primarily want her on the field when she has her elemental burst available to her. If not, her damage will suffer, in which case it's probably better to switch her out to other characters to set up elemental reactions and more. And then the final build I'd recommend for Kokomi is the Overkill Healer build. This build makes Kokomi's healing even more effective than it is, to the point where it's kind of ridiculous in some respects. Now, for this build, when it comes to the weaponry, you want to go for either the prototype Amber again or Thrilling Tales of the Dragon Slayers. Afterwards, when it comes to the artifacts, you'll want to focus on 4 pieces of the Maiden Beloved set. This is an artifact set that when you wear 2 pieces, the character's healing effectiveness is increased by 15%, and on top of that, using an elemental skill or burst increases all healing received by all party members by 20% for 10 seconds. So the Bake Kurage will be healing for more, as well as Kokomi when she uses her elemental burst. So as you can see, it is an extreme healing build for Kokomi, but nonetheless this can be useful if you want survivability in your party. Anyway, as for the stats on that, when it comes to the Sands you'll want to focus on HP, when it comes to your Goblets you'll want to focus on HP or Hydro damage, and then finally on your Circlet you'll want to focus on bonus healing, or failing that, HP. When it comes to your substats on your artifacts, again you'll want to focus on HP. As this build is about healing, you don't really have to worry about the other stats. When it comes to your talent priority, I'd recommend focusing on Kurage's Oath and Nereid's Ascension evenly, and then finally your normal attacks last. If you're really on a budget and going through the game for the first time, and you need an artifact set, I recommend either going for the Exile set or the Scholar set. Now, the interesting thing about Kokomi when it comes to artifact builds is they're all interchangeable. You don't have to go for the 4-piece sets for any of these builds. You can mix and match all of these, combining 2 pieces with 2 pieces of another artifact set. So, say for example, with my support build, sometimes when I feel I want a little bit more damage, or I actively want to use Kokomi a little bit more, I will use 2 pieces of the Tenacity of the Melolith set and 2 pieces of Heart of Depth. An alternative would be 2 pieces of the Maiden Beloved set combined with 2 pieces of the Tenacity of the Melolith set if you wanted to focus more on a healer build. There are lots of options when it comes to Kokomi and her builds. So even though the builds featured here are kind of the extreme versions, they can be mixed and matched and changed slightly to what fits your own personal playstyle. But every character in Genshin Impact has various pros and cons. No character is absolutely perfect and flawless. When it comes to Kokomi, her first pro is her support and healing capabilities, able to provide support to a team, keeping them alive in even the toughest situations. Her elemental skill can keep the active character alive, and her elemental burst can provide some much needed healing and damage to the entire party. On top of that, her next pro is her elemental skill persists on the field even if she is not. This means that the Bake Kurage, the jellyfish, can continue to deal damage to opponents as well as heal the active character, even when Kokomi is not the active character, which is always a pro when it comes to Genshin Impact. And the final pro is that she is a strong Hydro enabler. Hydro characters are very good when it comes to Genshin Impact at the moment, and she is able to easily set up Hydro reactions, whether she's using her elemental burst, elemental skill, or even her normal attacks. but unfortunately there are cons to every character out there. When it comes to Kokomi, her biggest con is unfortunately her critical rate, her minus 100% critical rate. She can't crit at all when it comes to damage, and yes, you can have some niche and very memey builds that do increase her crit rate so it's positive. It's nonetheless more beneficial to not focus on crit rate and instead focus on the aspects that benefit her more, like her maximum HP. But nonetheless, it is unusual to have a character with negative critical rate, and I would consider it a con. And the final con, which is more of a personal con for me, is unfortunately the Kurage, the jellyfish, doesn't heal the entire party. It only heals the active character. So you have to either keep switching characters out for the jellyfish to heal them, or switch to Kokomi herself to use her elemental burst and heal the entire party that way. But regardless of these pros and cons, I still really enjoy Kokomi as a support character and a healer. Now when it comes to the team compositions that Kokomi can fit into, she can pretty much work well with any character out there, because her elemental skill can remain on the field regardless of if she's the active character or not. It means that she can pretty much contribute to multiple teams. On top of that, because she is a Hydro character as well, it means that she works well with Pyro characters to set up the highly sought after Vaporize elemental reaction, which deals increased damage to opponents. Main DPS Pyro characters definitely work well with Kokomi, such as D-Luke, Sangonomiya, Hu Tao, but you should also remember that this works well when it comes to Cryo characters as well, as Kokomi is able to provide a vital role when it comes to freeze compositions. Characters such as Ayaka, Kaya, Ganyu can definitely make use of Kokomi's ability to affect multiple opponents with Hydro. Means that you can keep opponents frozen for long periods of time, allowing you to easily crowd control groups and freely damage them. If you're using Kokomi as a DPS character, she does work well with characters who are able to have their skills or bursts persist on the field after they have been switched out, such as Fischl, Jiangling, Raiden Shogun, so she can benefit from elemental reactions assisted by those characters. Overall, Kokomi is an interesting character. She will draw many similarities to other Hydro support and healer characters such as Barbara, but I still think she stands out. Whilst I believe she is more beneficial as a support and healer character, she can still nonetheless contribute to a battle, dealing damage when the situation calls for it. On top of that, thanks to the fact that her skills are based off of HP, makes her quite easy to build and can definitely help when it comes to opponents who drain your health via the corrosion mechanic, or if you're in a situation where you need survivability via a decent healer. So there we have it. That is my character guide, an overview to Sangonomiya Kokomi in Genshin Impact. Now remember, there are multiple ways to play and use the characters in the game, which is one of the many aspects that makes Genshin Impact so enjoyable for me. So at the end of the day, use the characters how you want to use them. These builds are how I personally like to use the characters, and I hope they help you out in your adventures. So until next time, I've been Darcblade, bringing you a character guide to Sangonomiya Kokomi in Genshin Impact. Hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.